General Motors just shut down every single remaining manufacturing operation in Canada. Not scaled back, not restructured, shut down. Every assembly plant, every parts facility, every engineering center. The Oshawa Assembly Complex, one of the most productive auto plants in North America, a facility that has been building vehicles for nearly a century. The economic heartbeat of an entire city, gone. The St. Catharines powertrain facility, the Markham Technical Center, the Woodstock parts operation, all of it closed. 11,000 workers told their jobs are gone, not because they failed, not because the plants were unprofitable, because a foreign government told their employer to leave. And the announcement came wrapped in corporate language about strategic portfolio optimization and global capacity realignment. Language designed to make the destruction of 11,000 livelihoods sound like an accounting adjustment. Ottawa didn't beg GM to stay. Ottawa didn't offer a penny in subsidies. Ottawa didn't negotiate. Within 72 hours, Mark Carney announced the Canadian Automotive Sovereignty Initiative, a $12 billion plan to replace every job GM eliminated with something GM never anticipated. A Canadian-owned, globally partnered electric vehicle and advanced manufacturing ecosystem built on the exact factory sites GM is abandoning. European, Japanese, and South Korean automakers have already committed to production partnerships. Every displaced GM worker has been guaranteed priority placement, fully funded retraining, and wage protection during the transition. And one provision in the initiative, a regulatory measure targeting critical battery mineral exports, just put a chokehold on GM's own electric vehicle supply chain. A move the company's board reportedly called the most aggressive regulatory action a government has ever taken against a departing manufacturer. Warren Buffett said, GM just made the most expensive exit in corporate history. Not because of what it lost in Canada, because of what Canada took from it on the way out. But the line that every displaced auto worker in Ontario is repeating tonight, the line Carney delivered standing on the floor of the shuttered GM assembly plant in Oshawa, surrounded by workers who had just lost their livelihoods, is 11 words that turned a corporate shutdown into a national declaration of intent. They close the factory. We're going to build an industry. Let me take you through exactly what GM announced. GM's public statement described the closures as part of a global portfolio optimization. Portfolio optimization, strategic priorities. Every word chosen to make a political decision sound like a business one. The Oshawa Assembly Complex, a facility that at its peak employed over 20,000 workers, that has been building vehicles since 1953, that is woven into the identity of the city. The St. Catharines powertrain plant, one of the most advanced engine and transmission facilities in the GM system. A plant that won internal quality awards year after year. Shut down. Engineering centers, parts operations, logistics hubs, shut down. 11,000 direct jobs eliminated. And the timing, announced during the most intense period of the US-Canada trade war, during the same week the White House escalated tariff threats, was not coincidental. GM's history in Canada stretches back nearly a century. Communities grew up around these plants. Oshawa, St. Catharines, towns where GM wasn't just the biggest employer, it was the foundation. The restaurants where plant workers ate lunch, the daycares timed to shift schedules, the real estate market sustained by GM wages, the school budgets funded by GM property taxes, the small businesses on the main street that existed because the plant existed. 3 generations of families built their economic lives around GM employment. Grandparents who started on the line, parents who worked their way into skilled trades, children who grew up assuming the same path would be there for them. And there is one detail that makes the shutdown not just economically devastating, but morally obscene. In 2008 and 2009, when General Motors was on the verge of total collapse, when the company was days from liquidation, when the American auto industry was staring into an abyss, Canadian taxpayers helped save GM. The Canadian government committed billions in emergency support. Canadian workers kept the plants running through the uncertainty. They saved the company. And now, 17 years later, the company they saved closed the door on the way out and called it optimization. A line worker in Oshawa, 53 years old, 31 years on the assembly floor. His pension is 16 months short of full vesting. Too old to retrain easily. Too young to retire. His mortgage has 11 years left. His daughter starts university in September. A young couple in St. Catharines who bought their first house 8 months ago qualified for the mortgage on 2 GM incomes, both notified on the same day. A single mother working the second shift because the plant's daycare ran until 11 at night. The plant closes and the daycare closes with it. A small business owner who runs a diner 400 meters from the Oshawa plant's main gate. She's done the math. 60% of her weekday revenue comes from plant workers. She has 3 employees. She gives them a month. Every direct job at a major auto plant supports an estimated 3 to 4 jobs in the surrounding economy. 11,000 direct job losses means 30 to 40,000 families affected. The parking lot at the Oshawa plant, the morning after the announcement, empty. The shift horn that should have sounded at 6 a.m., silent. The break room, where 1,000 conversations happened every day, locked. And the real reason, is worse than the shutdown itself. Because GM didn't leave Canada because it made business sense. GM left Canada because it was told to. Reports emerged that the administration communicated to American auto manufacturers that maintaining significant production in Canada during the trade war would be viewed as inconsistent with American economic priorities and would affect their standing on regulatory approvals, government contracts, and access to federal EV manufacturing incentives. Leaked internal communications laid it bare. GM executives communicated that the Canadian closures were driven by the current trade policy environment and the administration's expectations regarding production geography. Production geography, not production quality, not production cost, not production efficiency, geography. A senior GM executive reportedly told board members that the Canadian operations were profitable, productive, and among the highest quality facilities in our global network, but that maintaining them creates political exposure that exceeds the operational benefit. Profitable, productive, highest quality, closed anyway. Not because the plants failed, because a government told their employer that the political cost of staying was higher than the economic value of the work. 11,000 workers lost their jobs to a political calculation made by people who will never know their names. And then Ottawa responded. And the response was not what GM expected. The Canadian Automotive Sovereignty Initiative, $12 billion in public investment and committed private partnership capital, announced within 72 hours of the shutdown. Its structure communicated a devastating philosophy. We are done with dependency. We are building sovereignty. The first component was new manufacturing partnerships. The speed at which they materialized stunned the industry. Volkswagen Group committed to a new EV assembly facility in Oshawa on the GM site, hiring from the same labor pool. Toyota expanded its existing Canadian operations and committed to a new battery component plant in southern Ontario. Hyundai Kia signed a letter of intent for a Canadian assembly facility focused on electric crossovers. Honda accelerated expansion of its Alliston operations. BMW entered preliminary agreements for a component manufacturing partnership. The strategy was deliberate and pointed. The exact communities GM abandoned would host the production lines of GM's competitors. The same workers, the same towns, the same parking lots, different name on the building. The message to GM was unmistakable. You left a vacuum, and we filled it before the dust settled. The second component was a Canadian-owned EV ecosystem, a government-backed national EV battery gigafactory, the first fully Canadian-owned large-scale battery manufacturing facility, projected to employ over 3,000 workers. Research and development hubs for battery chemistry, autonomous driving systems, and advanced manufacturing robotics. The vision was not just to build cars in Canada for foreign companies, but to build Canadian automotive technology. The third component was the Worker Transition Program. Every displaced GM worker was offered priority placement in new facilities, fully funded retraining programs, wage protection guarantees during the transition, pension and benefits bridging for workers within 5 years of retirement. The commitment was binding. No GM worker will be abandoned. No GM community will be left behind. The fourth component was supply chain restructuring, redirecting the hundreds of Canadian auto parts manufacturers, tooling companies, and logistics firms that had supplied GM toward the new partners. The industrial fabric of Southern Ontario wouldn't be torn apart. It would be rewoven. And then one provision transformed the initiative from a defensive rebuilding program into an offensive strategic weapon. Canada implemented a critical mineral export responsibility framework, a regulatory structure that conditions the export of Canadian nickel, cobalt, lithium, and other battery minerals on the purchasing manufacturer's commitment to maintaining Canadian production. Manufacturers with active Canadian facilities receive priority mineral export access at standard market terms, full allocation, market pricing, streamlined approvals. Manufacturers that have closed Canadian facilities face export restrictions, premium pricing surcharges of up to 30%, and reduced allocation quotas. The framework doesn't name GM. It doesn't need to. GM just closed every facility it operated in Canada. GM now falls automatically into the restricted category. The implications for GM's electric vehicle strategy are catastrophic. GM's entire EV roadmap depends on securing stable, long-term, competitively priced supply of battery minerals. Canada controls massive reserves of exactly the minerals GM needs. GM's EV future runs on Canadian rock. And Canadian rock just got 30% more expensive for GM and 30% cheaper for every competitor that had the sense to stay. Toyota is building in Canada with priority mineral access. Honda is building with priority access. Hyundai, Volkswagen, BMW, all building, all receiving priority access to the exact minerals GM needs at prices GM can no longer get. In 5 years, those manufacturers will produce electric vehicles with structurally lower battery costs than GM can achieve. Not because they are better at engineering, because their mineral inputs are cheaper. GM left Canada to avoid political risk. By leaving, it created a supply chain risk that is orders of magnitude more devastating. The political risk of staying was an uncomfortable conversation with the White House. The supply chain risk of leaving is competitive extinction. The shutdown hurts GM more than it hurts Canada. Canada's loss is real. 11,000 jobs lost, economic disruption, short-term pain. None of that is minimized. But Canada's gain is structural. A diversified, multi-manufacturer automotive ecosystem, Canadian-owned EV technology, a vertically integrated mineral-to-assembly supply chain, partnerships with 5 of the world's 10 largest automakers, and the permanent elimination of the single manufacturer vulnerability. Canada, pain is transitional. It has a timeline and a plan. GM's pain is structural and compounding. Every year GM operates without priority mineral access, its cost disadvantage grows. Every year its former workers build vehicles for its competitors. In 2009, Canada saved GM from bankruptcy. In 2026, GM abandoned Canada. And Canada's response ensured that GM's exit would cost the company more than its bankruptcy nearly did. Warren Buffett addressed it. Never abandon a position that controls your supply chain. That is the one rule in business that has no exceptions. You can survive losing a market. You can survive losing a customer. You cannot survive losing access to the inputs you need to make your product. GM's Canadian plants were profitable. The facilities were productive. The workforce was excellent. The closure was not a business decision, it was a political decision. And now GM is learning the difference. GM brought the jobs home, and it left the minerals it needs to build every electric vehicle in its entire future product line. In 5 years, Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, Volkswagen, BMW will produce electric vehicles with lower battery costs than GM can achieve. Not because they're better at manufacturing, because they have cheaper inputs. GM didn't just lose factories, it lost the cost structure of its future. GM made the most expensive exit in corporate history, not because of the factories it lost, because of what Canada took from it on the way out. The minerals, the supply chain, the cost advantage. GM closed a factory. Canada revoked its supply chain. Lose the supply chain, and you've lost everything. And then Carney spoke. Not from Parliament, not from a press theater, from the floor of the GM assembly plant in Oshawa. The plant that had just been shut down. The line was still. The machines were cold. The floor was empty of everything except people. Workers. Some still wearing their GM uniforms. Some holding their identification badges. Some holding their children. Carney stood among them, not above them, on the floor, at their level. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you this doesn't hurt," he said. "It does. You gave decades to this company. Your parents gave decades. You built vehicles that drove on every road in North America. You showed up for every shift. You met every standard. You built a world-class product on this floor. And a foreign government told your employer to abandon you. Not because you failed. You never failed. Because politics failed you." He paused, looked around the plant floor. "But I will tell you this. This floor will not stay empty. These machines will not stay silent. This town will not be written off. The plan we announced today guarantees every worker in this plant a path forward, a job, retraining, full wages during the transition, and a future in an industry that is being born on the exact ground where another industry tried to die. Volkswagen will build on this site. Toyota will build in this region. Hyundai, Honda, BMW, they're coming. They're coming because you are here, because your skills are here, because the workforce that built GM's best products is the workforce that will build the next generation of vehicles." He paused again. The plant was silent except for his voice. "They closed a factory. We're going to build an industry." He let it land. Not for GM, not for any single company. A Canadian industry, built by Canadian workers, on Canadian terms, powered by Canadian resources. And it starts here, on this floor, with you. The ovation was raw. Workers in steel-toed boots clapping and shouting in a space designed for machines. The sound echoed off the assembly line infrastructure. Within an hour, the image was on every front page. Within 3 hours, his words were trending in 26 countries. So here's where we stand. GM shut down every Canadian manufacturing operation. 11,000 jobs, 4 communities. Decades of production ended under political pressure from the White House. Ottawa responded with a $12 billion Automotive Sovereignty Initiative. New manufacturing partnerships with 5 global automakers. A Canadian-owned EV ecosystem. Binding worker transition guarantees. And a critical mineral export framework that restricts GM's access to the battery minerals its electric future depends on. Every GM competitor building in Canada gets priority mineral access. GM gets surcharges, restrictions, the back of the line. Buffett called it the most expensive exit in corporate history. Not because of the factories GM lost, because of the supply chain Canada revoked on the way out. Trump pressured GM to leave Canada to strengthen American manufacturing. Instead, he weakened GM's supply chain, handed GM's competitors a structural cost advantage, and gave Canada the opportunity to build an automotive industry that doesn't depend on American companies. He tried to take jobs from Canada. Instead, he took GM's future. And he gave Mark Carney the 11 words that every auto worker, every factory town, and every community that has ever been abandoned will remember. 11 words spoken from the floor of a shuttered plant among the people who built what was being taken from them. They closed a factory. We're going to build an industry.